بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهديه واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In the last episode, we stopped at the mandatory punishment for adultery or fornication. So, what is the prescribed punishment? Because we are studying the chapter that deals with prescribed punishments in Islam. We spoke about adultery, we spoke about so many things in the last episode, the prescribed punishments and their justifications and how to attack those who criticize them or doubt them. So now we're talking about the major sin of fornication or adultery. So what is the prescribed punishment for that? In Islam, there's a difference between a person who falls into such a sin and the category or the silver lining, if you wish, that divides between whether to be stoned to death or flogged 100 lashes. What differentiates between the two is the actual ihsan. And what is ihsan? Ihsan is a description that fits an individual if he were to ever get married in a legitimate marriage where he has consummated or she has consummated that marriage. So a muhsin or a muhsan is a person who is married at the moment, has a wife, or was married in the past, meaning he divorced his wife, or is a widow. This person is considered to be a muhsan, and if he were to commit the sin of zina, he would be stoned to death. And what is a non-muhsan? Anyone else is a non-muhsan. So even if a person got married but did not consummate the marriage and was divorced or widowed, he's a non-muhsan. If he commits zina, he would be flogged. If a person never got married in his life, yet he had many illicit, illegal, haram relationships that included zina, he would not be considered as a muhsan, because there is a difference between committing the act of intercourse when you're not married and when you're married and doing it. So the taste of intercourse for a married person is different than when it is illegal and haram. And if a person had sexual intercourse illegally, was never married, or committed sodomy, was never married, or did anything that is haram while not being married, this would not make him a muhsan. He's still a non-muhsan, and his punishment is being flogged 100 lashes, as mentioned in Surah An-Nur. And in order for this punishment, whether stoning or flogging, in order for it to be implemented, the adulterer or the fornicator must have a number of conditions. Number one, he has to be an adult. One would say, well, can a child have intercourse? Some cases, yes. And he's not an adult. For a woman, for a girl who's not an adult and did not reach the age of puberty, she can commit the act of fornication, and we cannot implement the prescribed punishment on her as well. The fornicator has to be sane. So if someone who is mentally challenged to the extent that psychiatrically he is labeled as insane, if he commits zina, then we do not implement the prescribed punishment. He has to be free, and this is an issue of dispute, but there is no dispute that if a free slave commits zina and he was married, then would we implement the stoning? The answer is no. He has to be flogged, and he has to be flogged 50 lashes, half of the punishment prescribed for a free person, as mentioned in Surah An-Nisa, where Allah Azza wa Jal stated that slave women, when they commit adultery, they should be punished half of the punishment of a free woman. And when it comes to stoning, you cannot divide stoning into two halves and give him or her half of the punishment. So scholars say that it is remaining as it is, which is 50 lashes. And the fourth condition is that the adulterer or the fornicator had a previous sexual intercourse in a legitimate marriage. So if the marriage was void or not legitimate, this punishment is not implemented. Give an example, Sheikh. I'll give you an example. A couple divorced 3 separate divorces over the period of 5-10 years. They divorced once, reconciled, divorced again, reconciled, divorced a third time. So the woman goes to a young man and says to him, listen, I'd like you to marry me for a couple of days and then divorce me after having intercourse, of course, so that I can get married again to my ex-husband. And this is known in Urdu as halala or halala. And this type of marriage is void. It does not exist. It does not take place, because there is agreement between the two. And the Prophet ﷺ described the boy, the man, as being the borrowed goat, as if he's been borrowed, so that he would have sex with other female goats and then returned to its owner. So likewise, a person who marries a woman who was divorced 3 times in order to make her halal and to make her allowed to get back to her ex-husband is a borrowed goat. So they get married, and the guy sleeps with her for a couple of nights and divorces her. A week or 2 later, he commits fornication with another woman. He's caught red-handed, or he confesses to the Muslim judge. And when going back to his history, we find that he is previously married, but his lawyer says, Your Honor, the man married in an invalid marriage contract. It was void because there is an agreement between the two and it was timed for 2 nights. Here the judge says, then we cannot implement the stoning because his marriage was invalid. So the intercourse that took place in an illegitimate and invalid marriage, and he refers only to the second option of prescribed punishment, and that is flogging 100 lashes. What about the mandatory punishment for adultery? It is, as stated before, it is stoning. So if a man or a woman who were legitimately married and had intercourse with their spouses while married, if one of them commits adultery and he confesses or was caught red-handed with 4 male witnesses, as we will come and discuss inshallah later on, they all testify against him or her. In this case, that individual must be stoned to death. And stoning to death is something that a lot of the Muslims may find it not usual, because we don't have it implemented nowadays, which causes a lot of the Muslims to be doubtful whether to implement it and not. In addition to the fact that many unfortunately so-called preachers or scholars or da'is who belong to the sects of bid'ah, like the Khawarij, like the Mu'tazila, like those who reject hadith, they would probably cast doubts about these things in the minds of Muslims. And this would definitely lead to a lot of doubts in their minds. And such doubts must not be present with a real, true, practicing Muslim. Why is that? See, stoning is something that the consensus of all scholars of Islam agree upon. It was reported that Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, said, Allah sent Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam with the message of the truth and revealed the book, which is the Quran, to him. His revelations included the verse that mentions stoning, and we read and understood it, meaning as companions. The Prophet ﷺ enforced the stoning punishment as we did after him. So the Prophet ﷺ stoned, and we have authentic hadith proving that, whether it is the hadith of Ma'iz ibn Malik or the hadith of Al-Ghamidiyya, and the Prophet stoned alayhi salatu wasalam, and so did we after him. Then he says, I fear that as time passes, someone might say that the stoning punishment is not in punishment in Allah's books, and it's he says is not in Allah's book. Thus, people would err by abandoning something Allah has legislated. The stoning punishment is right and in Allah's book, applicable to stoning, enforceable on adulterous men and women, provided the required evidence is confirmed, or pregnancy takes place, or confession is given. Who said this? It was Umar ibn Khattab. And one claims, wait. I've read the Quran from cover to cover and I did not find any reference to stoning. And we covered this before. And we said that Allah mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, مَا نَنْسَخْ مِنْ آيَةٍ أَوْ نُنْسِهَا نأتي بخير منها أو مثلها ألم تعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير. Whatever ayah, whatever verse of the Quran we abrogate or we make you forget it, meaning Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, then we will replace it with something that is better than it or similar to it. So what is the concept of abrogation? An-naskh, abrogation, has different forms, and I explained that before, but I am certain that most of you have forgotten it, because knowledge, if you do not write it down and revise it every now and then, it will vanish from your head, because we're not computers. At least most of us aren't. Yes, there are people who are gifted with this gift of memorizing things, but not all of us are like that. So abrogation is of three types. Abrogation of the text while the ruling applies. Abrogation of the ruling while the text stays. Abrogation of both the text and the ruling. So abrogation of the ruling while the text remains is what we read a lot in the Quran, where Allah says, for example, about intoxicants, do not pray while you are in the state of intoxication until you are aware of what you recite. And this was in a particular phase of time when it was not prohibited to consume wine, but as a preliminary and introductive measure, Allah told them, do not be in the state of intoxication when you have to pray. So if I were to consume wine after Dhuhr, Asr time, I'll be intoxicated. So I can't do that. If I consume it after Asr, Maghrib time, I'll be intoxicated. So I can't do that. So the best time to be drunk is after Isha, because you have like 8 to 10, maybe 11 hours of night, and you will have time to sober out. Maybe after Fajr, because you will have 6-7 hours to sober out. So this, at a phase of time, was permitted, but then it was abrogated, where Allah said you have to refrain and stay away from it. Khalas, end of story. So this is the abrogation of the ruling while the recitation remains. The ayah itself is in the Quran, we read it. The second type of abrogation is the abrogation of the text. It's not in the Quran anymore, but the ruling remains. And the scholars give an example of the stoning. As Umar said, may Allah be pleased with him, stoning was an ayah. It was abrogated. It was taken out from the Quran. Why? This is Allah's choice. Yet the ruling remained because we read the ayah before it was abrogated and not to be recited anymore as an ayah. We also stoned at the time of the Prophet ﷺ a number of times, and we, the companions after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, we also stoned. We also stoned adulterers. So this is a confirmed ruling in Islam. The third and final type of abrogation is to abrogate the ayah and to abrogate its ruling as well. And we mentioned this in the book of breastfeeding or suckling, where in the beginning it was revealed in the Quran that 10 sucklings would prohibit a child and would make him the son of the woman who suckled him. This was abrogated into 5 sucklings instead of 10. And even that was abrogated from the Quran, but the ruling remains. So 10 is both abrogated text and ruling as well. So nowadays, stoning is being looked down at, and the Muslims are almost ashamed of saying it. Not all Muslims, I'm talking about the ignorance, about those who are basically ashamed of everything in Islam, because unfortunately this is how they were, I wouldn't say brought up, but this is what they were led to believe due to them abandoning the Sunnah and the correct Aqidah. So Sheikh, how do we counter the attacks of people that criticize Islam for stoning? It's very easy. The tip of my mind, I would say that when was the last time a woman was stoned or a man was stoned to death? Maybe once every 150 years or 100 years. And you're talking about what? You're talking about 1.8 or 2.0 billion Muslims living on earth. So the prescribed punishment of stoning is quite rare. Why is that? Because in order to prove it, as we will see, you need a confession with conditions of the confession. 2, or you need 4 male witnesses testifying. And again, we will talk about this in a while, inshallah. And this is not something that is easy to prove. And this is why we don't see it often. Still, Sheikh, it is a bit harsh. Stoning a person to death, this is very harsh. And excuse me if I say maybe this is barbaric. This is barbaric. This is what you say. And no, I don't excuse you. You cannot say that, because this is the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jal. And Allah is the most merciful, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, but why, Sheikh, this severe punishment? Okay. The cause of this punishment is a desire, is lust, is the pleasure of the flesh. Do we all have this? Of course. We all look for pleasure and lust. As humans, we are keen to attain these pleasures of the flesh. And because everyone has it, Islam channeled it in a very easy and beneficial way. You want to fulfill your sexual drive? Get married. And made marriage so easy. If you really want to get married, it's the proposal of the guardian, the acceptance of the groom, the presence of 2 male witnesses, Muslims. That's it. Boom. She's your wife. Take her. We make things complicated. So we make weddings, we make big dowries, we make hotel receptions. And this is not all needed in Islam. Nevertheless, if this is what's prevailing in the community, you don't have to go for the moon. You don't have to shoot for the stars. Most people want Miss Universe. Well, go a bit down. If you really want to preserve your chastity, you can go really, really down. Any woman would do if you are sincere. But no, she has to be this, she has to be that, her hair has to be this, her height has to be that, she has to be a ballerina, and she has to know how to play the violin and the piano, and she has to speak 7 languages, Latin among them, and she has to have repented and memorizes the Quran in the 10 qira'at and the Bukhari and Muslim. Akhi, if you find one like that, I'll drop you my email. This is only found in Jannah. And before you make such conditions and require such demands, take a good look in the mirror and see if it fits with the conditions you're asking or not. So Islam saves your chastity by facilitating means for you to get married. If you cannot get married, then you have to fast. But once you get married and then you've tasted what halal is, yet your corrupt evil soul is yearning to haram and filth, and you commit this sin, and you don't commit it concealing your sinful acts, but rather exposing it by either allowing 4 male witnesses to witness the whole action in colors, then definitely you are an evil person and you must be eliminated. And such a punishment, as we stated in the previous lecture or class, such a punishment is a deterrent. And this is why it's unlike nude beaches or some parks in Europe or in the US, where you would find a man humping a woman in the back seat of a car or in the park or somewhere without any shame. Guys get a room, and they don't, because this is how animals behave, and these guys are closer to animals than to humans. So Islam prescribed this punishment to deter people from falling in such heinous crime. By the way, if you look into the Old Testament in the Bible, you'll find that stoning is live and present. So Islam is not the only religion that does this. But if you look at the sins that deserve stoning, you would laugh. For example, if a person fornicates with the daughter of the priest has a daughter, and his daughter is a bit kinky, and she fools around, and a guy had sex with her. You stone this guy. Oof, I didn't know she was a priest's daughter. Tough bananas. Stone him to death. If a person curses the king or says bad thing about him, stone him to death. Ya Sheikh, where is the freedom of speech? First Amendment. Stone him to death. If a person is disobedient and undutiful to his parents, take him to the outskirts of the village and stone him to death. Oof! What is this? We ran out of stones, man. What are you doing? If an ox kills someone, stone the ox to death. Even the animals? Yep, even the animals. And there are many other. So when your house is made of glass, don't throw people with stones. Don't criticize Islam because Islam only made stoning to death a punishment for a single crime, nothing else. Even apostasy, if a person curses Allah or curses the Prophet or the Quran, we don't stone them to death. We behead them, but we don't make them suffer before they die, like as in the case. So stoning is part of Islam. And the Prophet, as prescribed earlier, stoned Ma'iz ibn Malik, may Allah be pleased with him, who came to the Prophet ﷺ and confessed of adultery. O Prophet of Allah, I committed adultery, so purify me. The Prophet ﷺ looks the other way. The man goes to the other side and said, O Prophet of Allah, I committed adultery, purify me. So the Prophet looks the other way, and he did this 4 times, which some scholars say that it takes the place of 4 male witnesses. After the 4th time, the Prophet ﷺ started to interrogate him, hoping that he retracts his statement. So he said, maybe you kissed her. And he said, no, I committed adultery. He said, maybe you hugged her. Maybe you just, flirted with her. And the man keeps on saying, no, no, no. And finally, the Prophet said, ﷺ, did you actually have sexual, penetrative intercourse? And the man says, yes. So the Prophet looked at his people and said, is he crazy? And his people replied, no, Prophet of Allah, he's sane. So he asked the companions, smell his mouth, maybe he's drunk. And he wasn't. When everything was so clear and there was no escape, no doubt in it, the Prophet told them to take him and to stone him to death. Now, if an adulterer does not meet these conditions that make a person a muhsan, then he is given a lesser punishment. And that punishment is to flog him 100 lashes and to exile him for 1 year. And this is an issue of dispute. The lashes, we have no dispute in that, because this is mentioned in the Quran. The exiling bit, to exile a person, this is what Imam Shafi'i and Imam Ahmad, schools of thought, stated that yes, we have to combine the physical punishment with exiling him to another country or another village. Imam Malik says, yes, I agree. The combination is legit, and we have to do that as per the instruction of the Prophet ﷺ, but not for the female fornicator. Why? He said a female fornicator needs a mahram. And by ordering her to be exiled for a year, we would actually also exiling her mahram, who's innocent, who did not do any wrong thing. So why would we force him to accompany her when he's an innocent person? Imam Abu Hanifa says that no, even boys and girls must not be exiled, because this was not mentioned in the Quran, and because this punishment may lead to more heinous sins. So if I were to exile a boy to another country, he would fall into zina over and over again because nobody's watching, nobody knows him. and he would be encouraged to do these heinous sins. But this justification, this reasoning is going against the instruction of the Prophet ﷺ. What did the Prophet say ﷺ? In the hadith of Ubaidah ibn Samit, the Prophet said ﷺ, take this from me, take this from me. Allah has stated a way for them, that is, for the adulterers. The virgin man and the virgin women, 100 lashes and exile for a year. So this is the authentic hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. We cannot say that we should not implement this because of logic. It's a hadith. Some scholars in contemporary times of our times said, for example, I live in Jeddah. So if someone fornicates and we catch him red-handed, or he confesses and we flog him 100 lashes, when we exile him, we said, okay, as a punishment, we will exile you to Dubai. And the guy says, whoa, I hit the jackpot. Dubai? So no, maybe Bahrain, or maybe we'll send you to London or Vancouver, maybe Paris. So nowadays, exiling people is a luxury. People would love to be exiled because it's not like it used to be in the past. So contemporary scholars said that locking someone up in a prison cell for a whole year, that would be an excellent substitution to exiling him to another country where we don't know how things would progress. And this is a very sound judgment and a very good alternative, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. We move on to, should we move on? Yeah, why not? We move on to proof. So, how to prove the crime of zina? We said this so many times, either by confession or by the testimony of 4 Muslim male witnesses. And the confession has to be absolutely clear that it was a penetrative intercourse, because somebody comes and says, oh Sheikh, purify me, I have committed adultery and I'm a fornicator, I'm abiding in hell forever, you have to clean me. I said, what did you do? He said, I had fornicated with that woman. I said, okay, if I am quick to give my verdict and put him in jail and stone him tomorrow or flog him tomorrow, I would be doing a grave mistake. Why is that? Simply because I have to inquire, what did you actually do? In so many cases, people think that lying down nude with another person is zina. Touching and hugging and kissing is zina. And this is not true. The actual zina is counted with penetrative intercourse, where the man's penis is inserted in a woman's vagina. And there is a saying when people talk about this, and they say there is no bashfulness in Islam before they say something that is French. And this is not a true statement. All of Islam is based on bashfulness. But we say what the companions said and what Allah said in the Quran. La haya'a fi din. This is wrong. Inna Allah la yastahyi min al-haq. This is right. So you do not say there is no bashfulness in Islam. This is wrong. You say Allah is not bashful of truth. Allah is not shy of truth. So sometimes when we explain things, it has to be said in black and white. You cannot beat around the bush. So this is penetrative intercourse or sex. This is what is called zina. So the judge has to hear it described clearly by the person before giving his ruling. And this is why the Prophet did this. He asked Ma'az, maybe you kissed, maybe you hugged, maybe you touched, until he completely made it clear that this was not the case. One of the conditions of such a confession is that an individual has to stick with or by his confession throughout the whole process. What do you mean? So if I confess of such a heinous crime, and they take my word and they issue the punishment, and the following day I said, no, I didn't do it. Ya akhi, you said you did it. We have it on tape. No, I did not do it. I retract my statement. Yeah, but you signed. Too late. I said, no, I didn't do it. If he retracts, if he does not stick by his confession, we must accept that and halt and stop the punishment. Ya Sheikh, what do you mean? Ma'az ibn Malik, when he was sentenced to death by stoning, the moment they started stoning him and he felt the pain of the rocks falling on his body, he tried to run away. So they ran after him and kept on stoning him until someone hit him with a big stone in his head and killed him. So when they went to the Prophet ﷺ and told him about how he ran away, the Prophet regretted that and said, ﷺ, you should have let him escape. He was tried, convicted by confession, and he was being executed. Yet the Prophet said, you should have let him escape. Be sincere once in your life and tell me, is Islam a bloodthirsty religion? Would this happen anywhere on earth? If Islam was bloodthirsty religion, the Prophet would not have showed mercy to such a person who committed such a crime, confessed, and was sentenced to death. He would have told them, you did the right thing. You killed him. That's good. But he didn't. He said, as long as he had a room to retract his confession, you should have stopped. Gave him the benefit of the doubt. Islam is not a bloodthirsty religion. Islam does not want people to die, to suffer. But Islam is a fair and just religion. The other type of proof, other than the confession, is the testimony of 4 witnesses. Allah says in the Quran, why did they who slandered not produce for it 4 witnesses? And when they do not produce the witnesses, then it is they in the sight of Allah who are the liars. In order for their testimony to be accepted and to be implemented, there are conditions. 1, there must be 4 of them together. So if 3 come, this doesn't count, and they will be punished for slandering. There have to be 4 of them. 2, the witnesses must be sane adults. So children don't count, crazy people or mentally challenged don't count. 3, they must be men, and not only any normal men, men of integrity. So you don't bring pimps or junkies or strippers to make such an accusation. They have to be men with integrity. If you bring 100 women testifying, this would not do. because they must be for male Muslims. Number 4, the witnesses must have seen the act of adultery. So it's not enough to see a man on top of a woman and both of them are nude. No, it doesn't count. They have to describe it in detail. So their description has to be graphic, by saying, yes, I saw the man's penis entering and being inserted in the woman's vagina. And of course, this is almost impossible unless it comes from a particular angle. And it is impossible for a man to continue doing his thing when 4 at that particular angle are watching and witnessing. So it is almost impossible to have 4 witnesses doing that. And it shows you that Islam is not bloodthirsty religion. And the witnesses must be Muslims, and they must give their testimony in the same session. We don't take a testimony of a man on Saturday, the second man is on Monday, the third and the fourth are on Wednesday. They have to be at the same particular time. Otherwise, that would be slandering if these conditions are not fulfilled. One says, okay, Sheikh, I have a tricky question. How about if we place an HD camera and we record the angle, we record the whole thing? Would that be sufficient? The answer is no. This is not sufficient. Sheikh, but we have an HD, high definition camera, and the resolution is so clear, so graphic. No, this doesn't count. So Sheikh, 100 women don't count. And the video footage does not count. Why is that? Because this is a Sharia ruling and not something that is logical. So a third person says, okay, now I think I've got it. So no videos and no women. What about DNA, Sheikh? If we have the DNA to prove that this and that happened, all of these are circumstantial evidences, cannot stand in a court of law, in a court of Sharia, to implement such a prescribed punishment. Yes, circumstantial evidences have weight in Islam. I can, as a judge, lock him up for 5 years, 10 years, due to the circumstantial evidences. But the prescribed punishment of stoning or of flogging cannot be implemented without these conditions fulfilled as mentioned in the Quran. And the issue of slandering is another topic that may take us a while, so I believe that we may stop here and resume inshallah. Today's Thursday, on Monday bi'idhnillahi azza wa jal. So let's see what questions remain from the long list we had. I think we have like 10 of them, and then the admins inshallah will send me the new long list of the questions, and we will designate hopefully one day next week for a full session of questions, answering your questions. So Muhammad says, how could we help a family who cannot read the Arabic dua for the protection from evil eye, envy or jealousy, since their knowledge of reading du'as and surah is weak? Well, unfortunately, there's nothing much you can do. You can write it to them in a piece of paper and ask them to repeat it every morning and evening and before going to bed. And this would hopefully help them. But if they are unable to read at all, or to recite, or to memorize, there's nothing for you to do except to ask him to make dua generally to Allah Azza wa Jal. Nida says, in our Asian culture, the elders say we must not place slippers or shoes at the doors or outside rooms as angels pass by. Is there any such thing? The answer is no. There's nothing as such. Angels don't care about your shoes or your slippers, whether they're inside or outside, whether they're turned upside down or normally, as so many people think. This has nothing to do with that, and Allah knows best. Shabana says, is it obligatory upon a woman to give udhiyah on her behalf if she's not earning and she has gold more than the nisab level given to her by her husband and father? The answer is, the udhiyah is obligatory, or let us say, as the majority of scholars say, it is highly recommended upon the man who has a family. So if her husband is offering udhiyah, this is sufficient for him, his wife, and children, those who live under his roof. But if she doesn't have a husband and she is the head of the family, of the house, and she doesn't earn, but she has some gold, it is not mandatory upon her to give udhiyah. But if she is rich and can afford it, in this case it is highly recommended, if not mandatory, for her to give udhiyah, and Allah knows best. Farzana says, do I have to cover myself like in prayer for the prostration of recitation? So the question is clear. I'm not praying and I am memorizing the Quran, so I'm reciting a verse that has prostration in it. She says, I'm not covered, I'm not wearing my hijab, my hair is uncovered, I'm wearing a t-shirt at home. Can I offer this prostration? The answer is yes. Not only that, there are two prostrations that are offered outside of the salat. Prostration of gratitude and prostration of recitation. Whenever you want to offer them, you don't have to be in the state of wudu. You do not have to be covering your awrah, and you do not have to face the qibla when offering it. What? What is this, Sheikh? First time in my life I hear such things. This is what happens when you learn about Islam. Question: is your prostration prayer or not? Said, let me go back to the series where we began discussing prayer with the Sheikh in Islamic Fiqh. The Sheikh says prayer is a specific phrases and actions inaugurated with takbiratul ihram and concluded with salam. Okay, this is the definition of prayer. But prostration of recitation is neither inaugurated by takbir nor concluded by salam. So no, Sheikh, it's not a prayer. If it's not a prayer, then you don't have to cover your awrah, you don't have to be in the state of wudu, and you don't have to be facing the qibla. End of story. Wow, Sheikh, this is something new. Well, if you join in, you'll always find and learn something new, inshallah. So the second question, Sheikh, of Farzana. If after fard ghusl and praying salah, I discovered that my ghusl was not complete, do I have to repeat those prayers? The answer is yes. If someone is performing ghusl to uplift a major impurity, and after he performed ghusl, he prayed Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, and at the end of the night before going to Isha, she discovers that she has her finger polish, her nail polish on. She forgot to remove it. Question: is her ghusl valid? The answer is no, because it did not reach the nails due to this layer. Then all her 5 prayers are invalid. She has to remove the nail polish, she has to perform ghusl, and she has to pray Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha. Rabi'a bint Iqbal says, recently in the subcontinent, some Muslims volunteered to cremate body of a non-Muslim as his relatives and neighbors refused to take care of him after he died. Can Muslims perform last rituals for non-Muslims according to their religion? The answer is nope. And this is quite weird. We are prohibited to participate in non-Muslims' funerals or to assist them in it. To cremate a body is even worse. And if his own relatives did not want to do that, you as Muslims, do you want to be more Roman than the Romans? You want to be more Catholic than the Pope? This is ridiculous. They don't want to bury him or cremate him. Let them deal with him and in any way they want. But to interfere and to meddle your nose in something that you're not supposed to, this is totally sinful and haram. Hamyon says, I have 3 questions. 1, can we join a congregation after a person who's doing Sunnah prayer? So we come to the masjid and there's a person praying and we don't know what he's praying. Can we join him? Or we know that he's praying Sunnah after Dhuhr. Can we join him? Fard for us, him being Sunnah? The answer is yes, no problem. Number 2, what is the ruling of Purbani, that is Udhiyah, on a person who is not performing Hajj? We've talked about this and we said that the Qurbani or the Udhiyah is highly recommended for a Muslim who's not performing Hajj, and it is mandatory according to some scholars if that person is rich and capable of offering it with ease. And finally, in one family, how many Qurbani is obligatory? I mean, every person who gives zakat should do Qurbani? The answer is no. We said that it is 1 ram, 1 sheep, sufficient for a household where all live under the same roof and eat from the same kitchen. So even if they're all earning, like 5 boys earning, their father is earning, the sisters are earning, their husbands, etc., yet they all live in the same house and they eat from the same kitchen, they have to slaughter only 1 single sheep for the whole family, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. And with this we come to the conclusion of today's lesson. Until we meet next Monday, I leave you fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.